What's up, y'all? This is Seth Whiting coming straight at you from my microphone here in Portland, Maine, and my computer. And I'm a developer from Portland, Maine, like I said, and I've been coding for about 10 years. I wish I could start over. Go ahead.
Yo! Just coming in hot. This is Jake Pacheco. I am a barber from Augusta, Maine, and I've been coding for, we just went over this 7 months
7
now,
months.
officially.
Yep. The big
Yeah.
07.
Yeah, buddy.
Yep.
Getting there.
Getting. So today we are going to attempt to go over the fundamentals of React, which we've gone over the fundamentals of web development in general, and then we kind of drilled down to JavaScript. Now we're kind of drilling down more specifically just to React, because that's what we're going to be using whenever we're like getting Jake to work on stuff. He's going to be working within the framework of React. And that's kind of, I guess, like what I'm advising him to do and what I would probably advise other people to do for reasons that I've already gone over, like the fact that it seems to be the most popular framework out there, JavaScript framework. And a lot of companies are using it. A lot of companies know about it. Even like non-technical people have like heard about it if they're, trying to get a software product off the ground. They've probably talked to developers, and developers have probably said like, oh, you probably want to use React because you can find people, like you can hire people pretty easily for that. There's a lot of React developers out there. And there's a lot of React developers out there because there's a lot of React jobs out there. And it's kind of like, and also vice versa. Like there's a lot of React jobs because people know that a lot of people know React,
Right,
if that makes
React.
sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, we thought it would be good to kind of go through the fundamentals. And this might be a slightly Seth talking heavy episode. So if that just bothers you, then you're welcome to leave. No, but just in general, I'll probably do my Jake Pacheco big swing and a miss with explaining things, and he'll say, no, Jake, tiny swing and a hit is more powerful, and explain the proper way to explain something.
Yeah.
But yeah, we think it's definitely, I mean, the whole premise of the story of me learning coding is for it basically to get me to learn React and write in React. So we figured it would probably be good to have an episode all about the fundamentals and kind of the basics and the things that you're gonna probably be using in your day.
Yeah, like the most common stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm gonna try to remember to like ask you like stuff that you might remember from React, because we have like, if you have watched any of like the videos that we are soon to be putting out, that we will have put out by now, we've already worked with React a little bit. So I'm gonna be quizzing your memory and your knowledge and stuff, but
I'll try my best.
Yeah.
because the way that my brain works is he said all of that, and I just was like, the companion videos, and then I was like, the companion tapes, oh my word, we need to make these into VHSs. And yeah, so my brain is like all over the place. It's been a long day of stuff.
Cool.
But
This is gonna be great.
yeah, it would be great. I think I've remembered quite a bit of stuff, so I think we'll be all right.
Yeah,
I'll try my best.
Do you remember, so first of all, like, what is your understanding of like what is React?
Oh, it's, well, we call it a framework. My way of saying it would be, it is a it's okay, so it's again, so my way of saying it would be, it's a way that organizes, or a way that you organize your code, like your JavaScript, CSS, CSS, yeah, and
Hmm.
then and your HTML, and it's organized in such a way that you write it all on one page for the most part.
Hmm.
And that's how I would describe it. What it actually is a bunch of different things that I like to call modules. And it's basically all of these all of this built-in code is already accessible by the code that you're currently writing. And therefore, when you write it, it's a lot easier to write it in a way that feels more intuitive to us. So you don't have like a CSS folder and a HTML folder, and or file is what I mean when I say folder, uh, and a JavaScript file, and you don't have to make those all constantly, like, kind of in a convoluted way, work together. Instead, you just write it all as one thing. Here's my new headline, and it's in this color, and it does this if it has a function to it.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's basically just a different way of, it's a dark way to say it, but skinning the same cat. It's
Gross. Why would you
you're
say that?
no, no, but it's a yeah, it's a bunch of modules that make it so it's a bit easier to get the job done. And again, for me, when I started writing any of it, I was like, oh, this is so much more intuitive than
Hmm.
writing all of my JavaScript in one thing and then all my CSS in another and all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think what you were kind of hitting on, but like didn't say explicitly, but like
Yeah.
basically like you were talking about kind of the concept of componentization, like more or less.
Yeah.
Basically, like the way that you write React code is within the like the boundaries of a component,
Hmm.
usually. Like that's sort of its bread and butter, if that makes sense. Like you'll have a component for a button or a component
Yeah.
for uh, a form or a
Hmm.
component for an entire page that imports those components and organizes them, however you want
The
them to show up.
it can import the button that you've already created in another
Right.
component and can import other things. Yeah.
Yeah, the form. And the
Hmm.
form can import like specific form fields that you've made that are like, I want my all of my text fields to look this specific way and behave this specific way.
Hmm.
And it's not like the default way that they give me out of the box. So I'm going to make a component for this that does everything the way that I want it to and looks the way that I want it to. And I'm just going to use that instead of like the default one throughout my entire application. And it
Yeah.
makes it really easy to do that. And also, if you ever want to make a change to that specific field, that specific text field, you can just change it in one file and it updates everywhere
Yeah.
throughout your
Yeah.
application, which is great. Other JavaScript frameworks can do that. They do it in sort of a different way. Do you remember what sort of makes React unique, at least unique to like the other most popular frameworks out there? There are other ones that have come up since then that do the same thing in a similar way.
Hmm.
Um, but the other ones, so basically like React versus Vue versus Angular versus Svelte, those are sort of like the big ones out there. And all of those other ones handle HTML in a certain way. Do you remember how React is like different from that?
I mean, it if it isn't what I already went over kind of with the being able to write your HTML, your style, and your
Hmm.
JavaScript all in one thing. And your HTML technically is in kind of its own component as well, right? Like a JavaScript component or something.
So
It
basically,
it's
like, go ahead.
the computer's like understanding it as a JavaScript command, kind of.
Yeah, yes, you're very like you're right
I'm
there.
close.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, explain it properly. Big swing and a miss.
No, no, no. That
Yeah,
is like a big swing, and like you chipped it,
I
but
chipped
like
it. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So it's the basically the fact that you write your HTML within your JavaScript.
yeah,
It's using a type of markup code called JSX instead
yeah,
of HTML, which is JavaScript X. I don't know what the X
yeah,
is really.
yeah.
It's I'm pretty sure it's just taking the X from something called XML, which is a
Hmm.
way to present data in a way that sort of looks like HTML, but it's more just like for presenting data instead of using JavaScript objects like JSON, which is JavaScript object notation. Anyway, all of that is to say it looks like HTML, but it's
Hmm.
actually JavaScript.
Yeah, yeah.
And then,
So I was close to it. That's cool.
yeah, yeah.
I was like, I think that's all written in Java. Yeah. Anyways.
So then the compiler knows to make sense of that and turn it into JavaScript during like the build
Yeah.
process.
We'll turn it into JavaScript and
Or sorry, turn
separate
it
out
into
the HTML.
HTML.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, my bad. I meant
No,
HTML.
no. Yeah, I get it. I knew what you were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that's something that I didn't know then. That React is the only thing that you write JSX in.
So it's
I didn't realize that was the only.
the only like big framework that does
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
There's
Yeah.
also
So
another framework
there's
called Preact, which is
hmm,
like very, very, very similar to React, but I think it's focuses on server side rendering and also is like smaller. Like there's not as much to it.
yeah,
I've never written anything in Preact, obviously, like because I can't
yeah.
even give you a straight definition or
It's okay to
differentiation.
have a tenuous grasp on some
Yeah.
things. That's fine.
Yeah, so that one does it, and then there are other like a good handful of other ones which have sprung up since React gained popularity. But they are not on the same level as React at
No.
all.
Hmm.
The other ones that I mentioned are sort of close, but the React is still the most popular.
Hmm.
Angular is still pretty popular for like big like enterprise applications.
Yeah, I
Uh,
feel like I've heard that brought up quite a few
yeah,
times. Angular.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that one is sort of owned and maintained by Google.
Hmm.
And then they kind of like partnered with Microsoft in a way because they're using TypeScript, and Microsoft is the one who made TypeScript.
Hmm.
And then Vue is not owned by any big company, which which is interesting now that I think of it, because it's like very popular, but like
Bugs. I like
competing
it.
with yeah.
I respect
Yeah,
it so much when people are like that. Like they do their
yeah.
own.
It
Yeah.
was made by this one dude,
Jonathan
something.
View. No.
No, I think it's like Wu or something. I think he's Chinese. View creator.
On the next episode, have we been mispronouncing view this whole time?
Evan Yu,
Okay.
YOU.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, like I said, I don't think it's like owned by any like big company like the
Hmm.
other, like React is owned by Facebook or
Yeah.
Meta, I guess now. And Angular is owned by Google. And then there's one called Svelte, which is getting really popular.
I've heard of that one too.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
was made by a guy named Richard Harris, who worked for the New York Times, and now he works for himself, or sort of. The Vue, not Vue. Svelte was bought by a company called Vercel, which made Next.js. So they bought Svelte, and now they're doing some like Next.js-y type stuff to Svelte. And so
I have a quick question, and
yeah.
it's off topic 100%, but what do you get out of writing a new language? Like, do you get any kind of like you sell it to a company? Why would a company even buy it? Like, what's even the purpose? Like, they can just use it. So why would they buy the language?
Yeah, so
You know what I mean?
it's just to be clear, it's a framework, not a language.
No, I'm sorry.
It's no, yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Sorry.
why would they buy it? That's a good question. I'm sure that they have some incentive, but I think it's just like for like brand recognition for Vercel, maybe,
Yeah.
because they've got the like Svelte has the brand recognition for being like, basically it has the reputation for being the JavaScript framework that developers like to use the most. Like even above React. Like
Really?
React is still the most popular because there are the most jobs out there, basically.
Yeah.
But Svelte is very popular for developers because it's just apparently like delightful to work with. Like as you're coding it, you're like, I really like, the way that they did this. I like the way that they set this up. It makes me like more productive. It makes me feel like this is easier to grasp and things make sense a lot.
I have a question. No, yeah, I mean, yeah, I kind of do. How isn't there not a framework, but like a translator where like I could write something in Svelte and translate it to React with a click of a button? How is that not a thing? Like, is that not a thing? Is that a thing? I feel like that should be a thing. No?
It would take a lot.
Yeah. But you get what I
Yeah.
mean. Like that way it's like like you could get a React job because you know that, and you could get a Svelte job also.
So
I
I
don't
feel
know.
like you could probably
It's just
do
a
that with
thought.
ChatGPT. Like
Yeah.
if you just have like a component written in Svelte and give it to ChatGPT and be like, okay,
Yeah.
write the same thing but in React,
Yeah.
then it might be able to do that.
Yeah.
But it would take that kind of like
Yeah, that kind of knowledge of
intelligence,
it. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It would take a learning program kind of a
Right.
thing to be able to like actually translate it, because it would be able to find out what everything you're writing means and what it is, how it is written, and that.
Yeah.
All right. Huh.
Yeah.
Now, I was just curious if that was like ever a thing. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, not that I know of. Like
No.
if somebody built it, it would be like a lot of code that they would have to write, and it would have to be like pretty specialized. Like they would have to spend a lot of time translating from one framework to the other. So they probably would spend all their time on just like those two languages and not
add
open it
other
up
ones
to
to
like
it.
other
Yeah. Yeah.
other frameworks. I mean, I probably said languages.
No,
Yeah,
I
I
go to,
screwed up.
yeah. I'm sorry. I know.
Look what you did to me.
I got him all mixed up. Anyways.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sorry for the sidetrack, everyone. I was just like, I don't know. In my brain, I'm like, why don't they do that? But like,
Yeah.
now it makes sense though. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. So React though, getting back to React, because that is like what we're
That's the whole
focusing
goal
on.
here. Yeah.
So that there's basically, like I said, there's like the componentization thing of it, which it's done since its conception, and the like logo for React is an atom. Basically, it looks like an atom. And one of the like golden gods of React is this guy named Dan Abramov. who wrote a state management system called Redux, and it was so like amazing that the team at Facebook, I think it was still Facebook back then, took notice and said, "Oh, we want to hire this guy to like write React with us." Like so he wrote this like state management system for React, and then I think it opened it up to other frameworks eventually. But anyway, he started working on React and made a lot of like big changes. And I'm sure it wasn't just him. It was like him and this woman, Sophie Alpert, and some other people. Anyway, totally unnecessary to know. But they came up with, and I don't know if he had any part of like conceptualizing this, but he presented it. He was the one who like presented it at its like inauguration or whatever. But the concept of functional components, like they went before that, you had to write everything in classes, and I have talked about that before. Where like when I started out with React, I was writing everything in classes, and then like a year after I started, I think they announced these functional components, but we were already like pretty deep into class components, so we stayed with it for a while. And then the next project that I got onto, I made sure to start writing things in functional components, because it seemed like everything was shifting,
moving that way.
Like they weren't going to, like, basically it was recommended that you start writing everything as functional components.
Yeah.
That all just means that you used to write it in classes, which were set up in like their own whole way. It was like a very like specific way that you wrote React code. And then that entire thing kind of just shifted and became, I think it became quite a bit easier, or like more straightforward, I guess, when they shifted to functional components. And when I am talking about the fundamentals of React, I'm not going to talk about class stuff. I'm just going to be talking about functional components, because it's been the kind of standard since like 2017 or something like that, 17, 18, somewhere around there. So basically the way that you write a React component now is just you set it up as a function. You just say function, and then the function name, and then equals, wait, hold on a second. Why am I blanking on this?
And then an arrow.
Well, so right? So you can do the arrow function. So you would just say like const function name equals parentheses, and then an arrow. And when we say arrow, we mean an equal sign and then a greater than symbol. And then open the curly braces, and then you write all of your component code within that function that you just wrote. Before, you had to say like class, whatever the class name or whatever the component name extends React class, and then you set it up like that.
I had to write one of those, at least one of those, in the learning to do React from Codecademy. But they quickly swept us over to functional components. Which, like you said, it makes more sense, and it felt like a lot less writing. Like writing the same thing over and over again in the class components was a little bit
leaner.
You
write a little bit less.
Yeah.
So along with functional components, they introduced something called hooks, because before, the way that you set stuff up at the beginning when your component renders, you did it all within the what was it even called? I'm totally blanking on what it was called, but basically there was like a block of code at the top of your component where you just like set everything up, like when this loads, do this stuff, and then you just work with it after that. you know, like it's like everything is already there.
Yeah.
In functional components, you can do the same thing, but you do it within a hook called useEffect. And do you remember at all like what hooks are? I like even I
I'm
would kind of struggle to like
yeah,
give a good
yeah,
definition, but
yeah. I mean, the only I mean, just your use effect thing, it would like when you said that, it made me
Mhm,
think it was like a when this happens, do this. But I don't know that
mhm.
that's what it is, you know?
Yeah, no, that is actually pretty much exactly like
Yeah.
how you would use a use effect.
Yeah.
Like
So it's like
when
a if then kind of a thing, or is it
sort of, it's more of like I don't know if we have talked about event listeners before. I think
yeah.
we have.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, yeah, because I misunderstood it as like the on mouse over thing.
Mhm,
All right, I
mhm.
took it as that, but we had talked a bit about event listeners. I think not in the last episode, but the episode before that,
Yeah.
maybe the last episode.
Yeah, so it's essentially event listeners are like you set up something so that your JavaScript code listens for like a click or a
Hmm.
mouse down event or like a key down or key
Hmm.
up event, just like anything that any kind of like interaction
Interaction.
that the user has with their like hardware essentially.
Yeah.
Use effect is different in that it's listening for changes in data basically on your
Hmm.
in your component. And so that's saying like whenever like the username, like if you're typing in a username or something, like whenever it changes,
Hmm.
then do something like
Yeah.
save it to the database or whatever. Like that
Hmm.
would be terrible, a terrible thing to do. Don't do that. Like I feel like I've run into that before where like every time you type something, it sends off an API request and like saves the data.
Like that'd be a
Where
lot of API requests.
yeah, exactly. I feel like I've seen that happen before. Don't do that. um there are ways around that. Like you can still do it so that like when you finish typing, then you can send
Yeah.
an API request, or you could
Or you
just
hit login or you hit create user or
right,
something, and
exactly.
then
Like
it's sending an API request.
yeah, or you can
Yeah.
separate the saving completely from like that text field and just have it be like a button that like whenever you press that and take the value of the text field, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
All of that is unimportant. What I'm getting at is the concept of hooks in React. So basically, React kind of not necessarily boils down to, but the really common things that you'll be doing in React are setting up components, exporting those components to be used elsewhere,
Hmm.
importing those components in like larger components, basically passing down data from the bigger components to the smaller components, and just if you're curious, it's set up so that you can pass down data to
Hmm.
the smaller components. Those are called child components. Basically, you have
Yeah.
a parent component and then a bunch of child components. You can pass down data from the parent to the child easily. It's hard, not necessarily hard, but it's like
More difficult.
it's not hard, but more difficult. No,
Well, I mean,
it's
hey,
just like
there's plenty of things that aren't
messy.
hard, but they're slightly more difficult.
Yeah, it gets really messy
Okay, so it's
to pass data from the child component to
yeah.
the parent component. Technically, it is possible, but
You
it's you
you
don't want to do that really.
you might call it almost bordering on unprofessional. Like it's like that's not how you do that. Like
Sort of,
don't
but
do that. Yeah.
they're there are ways to do it. Like if you absolutely need to, there are ways to do it.
It's like using class components or whatever, classes instead.
Well, no, not really. It's more of like what's called like an anti-pattern, which is just like a
Okay.
bad practice.
Yeah.
Basically, that's what an anti-pattern is. Like if you look up questions on Stack Overflow, like is it an anti-pattern to do this way? And people
Yeah.
will be like, yeah, pretty much like you should do it this way instead. And they'd be like, oh, I never thought of it that way. Okay, I'm going to do that instead.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
Is it
passing
just
data.
I'm
Go
just
ahead.
curious. Is it only kind of frowned upon because someone else who might work on your code might be confused by it and is like,
No,
why are you doing this? Or it does it actually make the system run slower or something?
no,
I'm
it's
just
it's
genuinely
just like
curious,
not really set up to do it that way.
okay.
So there's something that you can do that I can get into in a bit. Basically, there's a hook called use context, which allows you to share data back and forth from child component to parent component to child component, to completely separated components that have nothing to do with each other, that kind of thing. It's like
Okay.
more universal data store kind of thing.
Okay.
But uh, you can accomplish pretty much 99.9% of the stuff that you need to by just passing down data from the parent to the child, and having you can manipulate the data in the child component like via the child component, but the data itself is actually being manipulated all the way up in the
Oh.
parent component, if that
Huh.
and that might not make sense yet,
Okay.
but I think it should by the end of this.
Yeah.
So like I was saying, you create components, export them, import them into larger components, aka parent components. You can share data from the parent down to the child components, and that's sort of like structurally kind of like what React allows you to do. And then the hooks are kind of like the added bits of functionality that React, the framework, gives you to do the stuff that you need to do within your app, like to make it reactive. Basically, when a
Yeah.
user does something, here's how you kind of manage it. Like
This
here's
is this is its reaction to this, or
yeah,
to the user input. And
yeah,
that's not just like text in a field. That's like literally them interacting with the page,
right.
what the code actually reacts like.
Yeah, and we're saying react in like the
Yeah.
the
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 verb.
like actionable, like
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
the verb.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really have anything to do with React. It more has to do with like JavaScript. Like
Yeah.
you could totally achieve the same stuff with just JavaScript, and when it's all compiled, it is just HTML and JavaScript and CSS.
Yeah.
But this allows you to set up those interactions in a uniform and kind of streamlined and easy to work with kind of way.
So I'd like to ask one question then, just so we're 100% clear. When you say a hook, are you talking directly about pretty much event listeners? And if so, can we get just an example of either just a hook or an event listener? Just so we can kind of have like a really like 100% definition on either one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just and I'm sure you already have, but like a bit. But I'm just wondering. I guess yeah. When we're talking about hooks, are we talking about kind of the ability to do event listeners?
No.
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 Okay, I got lost in the sauce.
No, you're good. So the only thing that I like, the only reason I brought up event listeners is that basically you're listening for interactions on your
Mhm.
web page with event
Yeah.
listeners in just vanilla JavaScript, no framework or whatever. You can set up event listeners in just JavaScript, and that's just listening for those interactions.
Mm-hmm.
The parallel that I was drawing is specifically with the useEffect hook. The useEffect is only one of a good handful of hooks that React gives you right out of the box that are like the kind of like core fundamental React hooks. And the hooks, like I said, are just like the prepackaged functional bits that React gives you as a framework to handle things within your application in like a uniform and easy way. useEffect specifically is the one where it's going to be like when this happens, like when this changes, perform this action, basically.
Yeah.
So
Okay, and
that's the only reason
that's
that
why
I
you were
brought up the
saying
event
event
listeners.
listeners.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay,
Yeah.
I just got a little bit. Yeah.
Right,
So
no, you're good.
So are hooks then kind of what we were talking about when I was talking about modules, or would those be a completely different thing? Like, are they found in the same source folder that is in the React when you create a React app?
No, so the
application?
hooks are part of the React framework, and
Yeah.
you import them from React itself, which is going to be one of your node modules. When you set up like your React project, it's going to download basically the whole framework of React into a node module in your node modules folder.
Like kind of a packet of like a bunch of different modules, right?
Yeah.
I think we're talking about the same things, but I was using the wrong terminology with things. I think that what you're saying is what I meant.
Okay.
Because
so you're go ahead.
I said the source folder. I don't know what folder I was talking about, but I just mean like my folder that has all of my what I always call modules. Would that be where all my hooks are as well? I guess. Are the things that make React pretty much all made up of a mixture of modules and hooks, or just hooks?
So let me clarify some things. So your source folder is where you're going to be writing your code. The node modules, node_modules folder is where you're going to be downloading all of the third-party code that you didn't write and will never touch, basically. And that folder is for all of those packages that you're using within your code that you now have access to just call upon, like, give me this bit of code that they wrote for anyone to use. Like, I'm going to start using it. So I'm going to start using React as a whole to interpret like my modules, or sorry, not my modules, to interpret my components as components, and and then I'm going to grab the useEffect hook and put that into my component. And I'm grabbing that from React. And then I might grab the like Firebase package and say, okay, I'm going to start using Firebase now within my project. It's like the code for it is in my node modules.
It's already there.
Folder. It's there for me to use if I want to. And I do in this particular instance. So I'm going to import Firebase and start using it. Or I'm going to import this like date package that makes dates work, much more efficiently and easily, to just like say, basically get today's date and add 5 days to it. And that's like when I want to like send an alert to someone or whatever. Doing that specific thing in JavaScript is like harder than you would think, but there are a bunch of like packages out there that make working with dates way easier. So basically just like any code that somebody else wrote for free use for anybody else, that's all going to live in your node modules. And
Yeah,
React itself is one of those node modules.
node modules.
Yeah.
Huh.
And
Okay.
within that big package of React, they have basically like the baseline React stuff, which just knows how to like read your components and work with them. But then
Hmm.
there are like individual files for each of these hooks. And they're
Yeah.
just like bits of functionality that they've
Okay.
written for you.
Yeah. So I guess that this whole like what you just said, it made me go, oh, they're all in a node module folder. But then also I was close but no cigar again with my big swing. Because I was like, no, like I mean like it's all it's you have all of your folders that make everything function and stuff, and like that's all, they're all different modules. And I remember you describing to me like, oh, it's actually like just a bunch of different modules that create React, not just, it's not its own thing. It's really just a bunch of modules that are it.
Mhm.
So that's what I was thinking about, but I didn't realize that it was that all of it was again in another thing, which is Node,
Well,
I
so it's
guess.
node modules.
Yeah, Node
So
modules is what I, yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
node modules like they really don't have a ton to do with Node.
Hmm.
Basically, it's they're all of your node modules are kind of like hosted by a service called npm,
Yeah.
which is Node Package Manager, and that's just a big kind of like storage kind of like host place for all of these super useful packages that people have
Yeah.
created and
Well,
made available for anyone to download.
it's if everyone's followed along, or if anyone's followed along with our live coding thing as well,
Mm-hmm.
you'll see me write npm, what is it, execute npm what?
Run dev.
Yeah, run dev. Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that me running one of those packages or something? Or is that
Actually, that's you like uh running like a server process. So
okay?
N
If I were
npm.
to, I was
Go
gonna
ahead.
say, if I were to run one of the packages, how would that be written? Just so in the future, if I do that, then we know, oh, he's talking to the package manager or whatever, you know?
Yeah, so the you wouldn't really interact with the packages. So the npm run dev thing is
Hmm.
basically you you have downloaded npm as a command line interface, the
Okay.
CLI,
Hmm.
and that is sort of different than the kind of like hosting thing that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Like npm, the kind of like hosting organization thing is just like where all of the packages live in the cloud. It's sort of like a GitHub,
Okay.
kind of like that you could draw parallels between it and GitHub, where it's just
Yeah.
like hosting a bunch of other people's code. But the way that you pull it down and stuff is different than you do in GitHub.
Okay. All right. So when I was working anything with npm like in the terminal on
Mm-hmm.
VS Code, that's not the same thing as talking to the packages. Sorry for the confusion, everyone.
No,
But
you're fine.
yeah, so
That is
that's,
confusing,
well,
but like
I was like, I know npm, and then I
right.
guess I don't.
But so if you run like npm install and then
Yeah.
the name of a package, it's going to install that into your node modules folder.
Okay.
So that's like one of the main functions of the npm command line interface.
Okay.
It's like install or uninstall packages,
Okay.
but they can also basically like kick off node processes, like server processes, like the
Okay.
npm run dev thing
Whatever. Yeah,
is
yeah.
basically just like calling to node and saying like start running this process that we've set up.
So so then in that case, you would install a package into your node modules, and then you still have to bring it up in your code to use that package.
In order to use
Yes.
the package in your node modules,
Yeah.
you would just say like import React from React.
Oh,
And,
okay. All
and when
right.
you
So
say
that's
that from
it
React,
brings
it
that one
knows.
too.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you just say like, so one of the, like the date node modules that's available for people is called day.js. There's another one called moment. So you could just say like import basically day.js from day.js. And if you don't
Okay.
say like / day.js, like if you just say day.js, then it knows that's a node module. Like
Huh.
if you don't give it
That's
like a
cool.
relative path
Yeah.
or any
Yeah.
kind of path,
Yeah. Like you
it
would
just
with an
knows like,
image or something like that.
yeah, like images you need to import via like a path. But if you don't give it a path, if you just give it a name, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, that must be a node module. Let me look in the
Hmm.
node modules folder.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Huh. I didn't know. Alrighty.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, sorry again for sidetracking all of
No, I mean,
us. Yeah, I mean,
nobody else knows it. If
yeah,
you don't know it,
yeah.
nobody else
I mean,
does.
maybe.
I mean, yeah, unless
They could be
there's
smarter.
a bunch of like
Yeah,
senior
bunch of
devs
junior
listening to
devs.
this.
Yeah, but yeah, good to know. Okay, so that gives me a pretty solid grasp on hooks, even though I'm sure there's 1,000 more things I can do with hooks that I don't know about. But it gives me an idea of it.
Yeah.
Um, so is that pretty much what you're using, or what the usefulness of React is most of the time, is the ability to use all these different hooks?
Yeah. So it's the ability to set up your code in components and the ability to write your HTML as JSX and the ability to write like the CSS and JS kind of stuff to kind of like encapsulate all of your individual like small components and then import them into your larger components and that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. That's all stuff that is facilitated by React, the framework.
yeah, yeah,
Kind of the rest of the fundamentals of React nowadays boils down to hooks.
yeah. Huh.
And the specific hooks that you use every day, the number one most used hook by far, I would say, is useState. And that's basically just setting up bits of data in your component that are going to change at some point. So the way that you set it up is you say const and then square bracket data, comma, set data, and then close square bracket equals useState, and then whatever you want to have it be. So like if it's a Boolean, you would set it to like false, and then you could set it to true later. So a common thing for this is like a loading state. Let's say
Okay.
if you're opening up a component that's like a table, let's say, and you want to populate that table with some data, you would say you would set up a use state at the top of the component that's called loading,
Okay.
or you could say is loading. Sometimes you just say like is something or
Yes.
is
Yeah.
not. It's like just a clear way of saying like it is or it isn't,
Yeah.
true or false. And so that's going to be a Boolean value. So loading or not loading. So if you set up this like use state thing and give the basically use state allows you to set up kind of like two variables within the square brackets. One is going to be the value, and then the other one is going to be basically like the setter for that value. So you have a loading and then you have a set loading.
Okay.
And you can this is like not something that is like defined by React. Basically, these are variables that you're declaring. So you can call them whatever you want. You could say like ready and then set ready, you know? So
and when you say set, do you mean like you're setting ready when it's at whatever? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
so
yeah,
when you
set ready at 100% loaded kind of a thing. Like once it's 100%, you're
So basically, like the use case for this is you have this this loading state variable, and then the set loading setter kind of variable. And when you load the component, you will have a useEffect in there that fetches the data for that table.
Yeah.
And the data fetching is going to be an asynchronous function. So you're going to set up like an async await. So basically you await the fetch there. So once you get that data, once you're done awaiting that fetch call, then you would set loading to false.
Yeah.
So at the when you declare const loading, comma, set loading equals useState, within the parentheses after useState, and I kind of glossed over that. When you say useState, you have to open and close parentheses after that in order for it to work, because it's a function basically, and you pass it a parameter. The parameter that you pass is the initial value of that that variable that you're setting. So in this case, loading is going to initially be set as true.
Yeah.
So within those parentheses, you pass true.
Yeah.
So it's true until you fetch the data and then you set it to false. And within your JSX, you'll write a conditional statement and say, if loading, show just like a little spinny wheel.
Yeah.
And then else, show the actual data.
Show the data. Yeah.
Table. Data.
Yeah.
Show the actual table populated with the data that you just fetched.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Huh.
So that's like one of a Brazilian different use cases for set state, or sorry, useState.
Yeah. Huh. So yeah, it's basically just a it can be like a placeholder in a way, where it's like, hey, do this until this happens, and then this happens, and or kind of actually functions at that point. Because if you just do an if else statement, it's like it's not going to really know what the heck you're talking about, right? Like,
you mean within your JSX when you're saying like, if it's loading, show this, if not, show this.
Yeah. It does something, but it's not really getting any information from anywhere. So then it's like, in order for it to get the information, you need a useState, right?
In order to get the information, you need the like that fetch.
Yeah.
Basically that like asynchronous fetch call.
Yeah.
That's gonna ping your server, grab the data, and then when you have the data, you'll probably have a useState for the data, like I was saying. So like you'd have a const loading, set loading equals useState, and then you could also have a const data, set data equals useState, and just set that to like an empty array basically at the beginning. And then once you fetch the data, you would do set data equals then like the return value of that fetch call. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I still feel like I probably almost definitely have like a tenuous grasp on it.
Yeah.
just because it's I think my brain right now is having a hard time visualizing like the usefulness of the use state thing, because it's like, because if it's the asynchronous that's actually waiting for the information,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's if else statement or whatever that's gonna print out my information, then the use state is that what's that doing? What's that? Is it holding? Is it just place holding so it waits or something? Kind of a thing. Like I don't,
No. So
you know what I mean?
basically, like I think I know what you're getting at. So like basically, it's it, so instead of using just like a let data equals empty array and then
Yeah.
updating that like updating data equals like fetched data basically,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then using that within your component, it's that's not going to work in React. And I think the reason for that, and I could be wrong here, but I think the reason for that is just because of whenever anything changes in your component, the code for that is going to re-render. So it's going to be like ripped out and then replaced. Like
Okay.
in the like not even the blink of an eye. It's going to be like less
Yeah.
than a millisecond,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So in order for it to like persist between the re-renders, you need to use this use state thing. So like
Okay.
whenever
Uh,
this data is going to change, use a use state.
okay. I'm thinking. So I think where I got mixed up here is
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking of it as a function.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense of I'm like, well, I feel like in JavaScript I could write a function that's different than that, and it would be the same thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
when it's no, it's because we're in React is why we're using this thing,
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
right?
And so like the parallel that you need to understand here and that anybody listening to this needs to understand is basically you're doing the same thing as declaring a let variable and
Mm-hmm.
updating it.
Okay. All right.
That's
Yeah.
what a whole that's the whole
So
point of like the the use state thing is like you're declaring a variable and then you're declaring a like a setter for that
yeah,
variable.
yeah, and it will change. So
Yep.
that's hence why it's a let versus a const.
Yep.
Um, all right, huh? Well, that makes sense now. Hey,
Mhm.
thanks for going extra
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I was just like, there's something sticking, and that's what it was. It was just that I was
Right.
thinking of it in JavaScript and not thinking of it being React kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Um, huh. So that's use state. Are there other ones that we're gonna end up?
Well, let me just give you one
Yeah,
more
yeah.
example of the use state. So
Please
if you
do.
have,
It can only help.
yeah, so let's say you have a component and that component has, we can say that it has, well, let's just keep everything in this component. So basically that component has like an H1 tag at the top of it.
Hmm.
And then it has a text field underneath that H1 tag. And when you initially, so at the top of this component you have a use state, and that the like you set it up as const square bracket name comma set name close square bracket equals use state, and then you can give it an initial string value of like James,
Hmm.
and then so and that's within the parentheses after the use state,
Yeah.
and then you can grab that name variable that you set up within the use state. So it's a state variable
Hmm.
that you have called name, and then you can put that within your H1 at the top of the component. So
Okay.
when you initially render that component on your page, it's going to look like a big, big in big letters, it's going to say James. And then
Yeah.
underneath that, there's going to be a little text field. and then you can set it up so that whenever you type into the text field, you can say on change, like that text field has like an on change event handler. And you can say on change and then do like basically like within the on change you have a function and it gives you the value, like basically the on change handler gives you the value of the text field, like whatever you have typed in there, it's going to give you whatever you've typed in there. And you can
it's gonna
take
print
that
it, kind
value.
of.
Yes,
or it's just gonna
you can do whatever you want with it. It's
Okay,
just gonna grab it. So in the on change thing, you can say like value and then arrow function and then set name, and then within the parentheses after set name value. So like the value of that
it is now the value that you wrote in the text field.
Right.
Right.
So you can write whatever you want in that text field, and then that H1, like that big James text, you can either like overwrite it to be the value of the text field, or you can like put it after James. So you could say like, and the giant peach. That kind of thing. Whatever you wanted. And so that's basically like you're setting it somewhere and using it elsewhere within your component. Like changing it somewhere and viewing the results of that change elsewhere.
It's kind of letting the code know, hey, we're about to do some stuff. Like we're gonna do some stuff that might be a little confusing to you. In a way, it's kind of like that, just because it doesn't really have another way of just writing a variable like that, so to where it just prints it or whatever, know. All right, cool. I think I get useState, which is exciting, because 5 minutes ago I did not. I was like, I felt bad because I was like, man, he just said so much stuff. But then once you described it the way you did, I was like, oh, and all the stuff made sense. So that is the goal of the podcast.
I should have started with that for sure. Like that's essentially what you're doing. It's like just setting up a variable and then changing the value of that variable. That's all useState is.
I mean, but all of it needed to be explained. It's just because now I understand how it all works, versus just understanding, hey, sometimes you use useState to do this variable instead. You know what I mean? Like it's like if it was just that basic, then it's like, well, no, I want to kind of know like how one would write that also, you know what I mean? And how that's actually interacting with what you're doing. And you did a good job of that, so thank you. So that's useState then.
So useState is like the most common one that you'll write, and it's not uncommon to have like a good like 4 or 5 or 6 different useStates at the top of your component. Like if there's like sort of a lot going on in your component, you're going to be using useState multiple times within the same component.
Well, you just said something pretty simple, like the that text field thing, and we were using 2 useStates on that. So it's like, and that's a pretty straightforward thing.
That was the table one. We were using the useState for the loading state, and then the useState for the data. Getting
that's what I mean.
Like setting the data. But the text field one really is just like that name and then set name. That was,
but either way, both of them are relatively simple, and the first one did use more than one. So good to know.
And with like I would say the second most commonly used hook, if you're ready for that.
No, I'm ready.
Here
I am.
Is the one that we already talked about, which is useEffect. And one of the most useful things about useEffect is you can set it up in a way so that it just runs once when your component loads and then is never run again, basically. The way that you set up a use effect is you use the words use effect, and you don't say anything equals use effect like you do with a use state. Like
Okay.
use state, you're setting up like the value, and then the setter of that value equals use state.
Yeah.
With use
So
effect,
you can then call back to the use state.
yeah, or like
In
the state variable
yeah, in the
and the setter
future.
for
Yeah.
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 With use effect, you just write use effect within your code, and
Okay.
it needs to be within your component. All hooks need to be within the boundaries of a React component.
Okay.
Just FYI.
Uh-huh.
Like they won't work if you write them like above your like component
Yeah.
declaration, basically.
Yeah.
Use effect, you'll put above your JSX and everything, but you can like it's most common to see it below any use states that you might have. It's
Okay.
it's totally possible to not have a use state in your React component. Like you'll run into that. And but basically like whenever you have both, the use effect is usually below the use state
Okay. Is
ones.
that just something that you should probably do organization wise?
I think there's probably so
Is
if
there
you're
probably an efficiency reason to do it, but it's
if
also
you're
just
using a if you're using a use state and a use effect, it's very common to use the state variable within the use effect,
yeah.
if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
if you're calling to something, it's a good practice to have that thing that you're calling above the place where you're calling it.
Okay. All right.
Like, and I don't know if that's essential, but
Yeah.
but it might actually be, and I just don't know.
So good practice. Just do it
Yeah,
and
basically.
stop asking
Yeah,
questions.
exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway,
So what's
you
it
write
actually
it.
do
So you write
though?
it as use effect, and then you open up some parentheses, and then
Okay.
within those parentheses, you put a function, like a full function.
Full function
So
with a return and everything. Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
so
Okay.
well, not always.
Okay.
So you say use effect, open some parentheses, and then open more parentheses and do an arrow, and then do your curly braces.
Yeah.
If you're writing it the arrow function way, you could write it where like you use the keyword function and then
Function.
do it that way.
Return. This. Yeah.
But most common you'll see arrow functions. So use effect, open parentheses, arrow function, curly braces, and then hit enter so that like you're within the boundaries of those curly braces. And then the thing about use effect is you have to then, after those curly braces, after the closing curly braces, you need to put an array. So that's going to be like closing curly brace, comma, and then open and close square brackets. So that's how you know that you're working with an
It's
array.
an array. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you close the like parentheses from
Original.
the original, the just right after use effect, you open the parentheses, and at the very bottom after that array, you close the parentheses, and then do a semicolon if you use semicolons.
Yeah.
So and then that's your whole use effect block.
Yeah.
That array that I was talking about after those curly braces is called your dependency array. And
Okay.
that's where you listen for things.
Hmm.
So if you're listening for loading, say,
Yeah.
and then when the value of my loading state variable changes to false, then I want to execute whatever is within those curly braces. Does that make
Okay.
sense? In the
Yeah.
use
Yeah.
effect curly braces.
So when we say use effect, are we actually like talking about a graphical effect or some kind of like effect? You
It
know what I
can
mean? Like a
be
special
anything.
effect?
So
Yeah.
the there's a lot of like debate over whether or not the words use effect were like the best words to use
Okay. Yeah.
there, but it's talking about the concept of side effects, which is
Okay.
basically like things that are kind of like kicked off by other things,
Huh.
if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
that makes sense. Like it's almost like something that is affecting something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, or like as an effect of this thing changing, I'm going to do this,
Yeah, yeah. Yep. Yeah, it makes
So
sense.
so within your use effect, you'll do, whatever you want.
Hmm.
But even back in my original like use state example, you can you can fetch data within your use effect. So that's the use effect is going to run on your initial page load
Hmm.
always, and then anytime after that, anything within your dependency array changes.
Okay. That makes
And
sense.
like I was saying before, you can set it up so that it just runs on your initial page load, or initial component load, I should say,
Hmm.
and then never runs again if you don't put
Don't
anything
put
within
anything
your
in the
dependency
variables.
array.
Okay. Array, not variables.
Yeah,
Array. Yeah, if you don't put anything there, then it's just gonna run when you first start up your page, and that's it.
yeah,
Okay. Huh.
exactly.
All right. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Huh.
I'm surprised at how well you seem to be understanding this. Like how
I
quickly
mean,
you caught on to that.
I
Like
mean that.
you answered that like thing before I even said
Well,
it.
I
I don't
mean
know
that
if
makes
everybody else will.
that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah.
It makes sense. It's yeah. Yeah, that this is coming to me a little bit better than the other one did.
Okay.
I
Cool.
just because it's like it's like a web page event listener kind of a thing. It's just like listening for something to happen, and then it's doing the thing that you're telling
Uh-huh.
it to do, which seems pretty. That makes sense. That makes
Yeah.
sense. So
Cool.
hey, hey, Jake got
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And just as sort of like a side note,
Uh-huh.
if you're doing the use effect thing and you're setting like the loading state, like in the original example, like you set it up so that it loads when it executes when
Hmm.
the component loads. And after, so within the execution of that, you run that fetch command to grab your data and then set the data and then set the loading state. Um, you can include the set data and set loading
Hmm.
things within the dependency array, and it will still only run once because those set functions don't change.
Huh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So because those set functions don't change.
So that last bit of information where like you can include things in the dependency array that don't change and therefore it won't run if you include them is probably like unnecessary for you to know, and probably like just like more confusing than like helpful. So
Okay.
don't worry if you didn't get that. uh
It's not a fundamental of React.
right, yeah, this is
Yeah,
more
okay.
just like, oh, this is little like nerdy information that I know. So
I enjoy
anyway,
that stuff too, but yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so basically there is like a reason why you would include those,
Hmm.
just because your code editor will basically tell you like, hey, if you're using something within the use effect, you need to include it in your dependency array. Like that's
Okay.
just like best practices,
Hmm.
and there are actual reasons for why you want to do that. But really, if you're just like learning about this for the first time, do not pay any attention to that. Don't it's not
Okay.
it's not super helpful. Uh so we've gone over use state, we've gone over use effect. There are other ones like use callback and use memo, which like
Hmm.
you should probably, when you get into writing React, those are helpful and useful hooks for sure. but they're kind of doing like very similar things to useEffect and use state. But you just kind of like set them up in different ways, and you should basically you should look into them once you're like in it, like once you're into React and like you're in the in the thick of it and stuff. You should look them up and figure out how to use them and make use of them, and they will be helpful and useful, blah blah blah. But they're not necessarily like the fundamentals.
Okay.
If you're talking about like the fundamentals of React, you're basically, it kind of boils down to like when I was talking about JavaScript, it's basically all loops and conditionals. When you're working with React hooks, it's basically like it kind of boils down to useState, useEffect.
Yeah.
There are other ones that are very useful. I would say like the third most useful hook that you will I would say well, not necessarily. It's just like ones that don't necessarily do the same thing as useState and useEffect. It's very similar to useState, and I touched on it before, where like if you're working with data that you kind of want to be sort of like globally available to your components elsewhere, if you're working with like data in this component over here, but you also want at least like part of it to be available to you in another component over there somewhere, then you can basically like wrap your entire application in what's called a context provider, and then you can set up sort of like a useState in that kind of like wrapper that is kind of like available everywhere within your application after that. You don't have to do it at the application level. Like you don't have to do it at the very top level if you don't want to. And it's like helpful, or like you can do some cool things with it if you don't do it that way. But that's sort of like how you'll see it used the most, is like at the very top level
of the application.
So that's available everywhere.
But this is when you were talking about parent and child components talking to each other. Yes.
Yeah, it's similar. It's similar.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of like you're wrapping it in like the parent of the parents of the parents.
Yeah. You're giving them all ownership to one thing, which is the thing that you're
one parent to rule them all.
Yeah, one parent to rule them all.
Yeah. So like an example of that I've seen used in like the React documentation and stuff is like if you have a light theme and a dark theme in your application, and you want to be able to somewhere way down like in your like settings component, you want to be able to set the theme to be either light or dark. You can set it in that one component that's sort of like nested deep down within your application, and then have it kind of like propagate throughout the rest of your application. Like I switched the switch here, but I wanted to affect all of these components, at least all of the ones that care about it. Like, this one looks different, whether you're looking at it, depending on whether you're looking at it in the light theme or the dark theme, basically. But it has nothing to do with that like settings component. That's just like one kind of one very basic example of how you could use it. But you can use it for like, if you log in to the application, you can have like a user context and say like, okay, I've logged in as Jake Pacheco, and I want to basically, the developer says like, I want Jake Pacheco to be able to see his name on his like profile, and also his like main like feed or whatever. Just like anywhere. I want it available everywhere.
It's adjusting it on multiple different places across the whole thing.
Yeah. but it
Cool.
just like fetched it in that
Yeah.
one place and doesn't need to like fetch it again after that.
Fetch it all over the place. It just
Yeah.
fetched it right there and applies it everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh. Cool.
Yeah. So that's
Interesting.
another useful one.
Yeah.
You definitely don't use that nearly as often as useState or
No.
useEffect because you
Hmm.
don't need to. It's just for like one-off little things like that where like you just want some little bit of data available everywhere.
Yeah.
You don't want all of your data available everywhere.
No. Yeah.
But so getting back to Dan Abramov, who works, with Meta now on React, like the React core team, that Redux framework or state management system that he wrote, like for React, that got him noticed and everything. That was basically what I was just saying you don't want. So like he made it so that you could set up like one unified state
Hmm.
storage for your entire application where every bit of state in your whole application is available everywhere that you want it.
Huh.
And that's still like commonly used, like semi commonly used. But then he came onto the React core team, and I don't know how much involvement he had in this, but he basically made his whole state management system obsolete by creating the idea of use context, where he's like, okay, you could do it that way, or you could just do the stuff that you actually want available everywhere to
Huh.
be available everywhere. You don't need
Yeah.
everything everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's a bit overreaching
Yeah, so the way
versus
that
just being
you,
like, no, I want this here. I want it so I can grab this from here if I need it,
yeah,
or like grab it from anywhere if I
yeah,
need it.
and like if you use Redux, it's like basically like you're sort of like over engineering your application. That was sort of like um the kind of like step that he I guess was like trying to avoid when using the use context thing.
Mhm.
And I keep saying it as though like he was the one who did all of this stuff. It was a whole
That's fine.
team working on it.
The,
But
let's go
anyway,
set ahead and say they.
yeah.
Yeah.
So but if you use Redux, like yes, it's sort of like over engineered, but like that sort of like has the kind of like benefit of like, okay, yes, it's over engineered, but like it works super well, and
Yeah.
it's like, it's
It's
super easy to grab any data that you want whenever you want it. It's
yeah.
but in order to like store it and retrieve it and stuff, you do end up needing to like write more code
Yeah.
and stuff. So
Yeah.
there's
So it's a
trade-offs.
flex. It's a flex.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's also like, that's a little overkill, but it's a flex.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes. So I used it on the first React project that I ever worked on.
Flex.
Um, but I didn't even know, I didn't know
Yeah. Yeah.
like
You're like, this makes
otherwise.
sense. Yeah.
But also like use context wasn't a thing back then,
Hmm.
that this was like
Yeah.
before functional components. So like it was either I use that or I just use like locally scoped state variables in like the old way that they set up state variables, which
Yeah.
is which worked pretty much just like the use state, but you wrote it differently.
Hmm.
But anyway, all of that
Anywho.
is to say, use context is very useful. You will probably use it pretty sparsely, but when you need to use it,
You're pretty
you
stoked it's there.
yeah,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
But use state and use effect you'll use all the time.
Hmm.
And yeah, that along with like the way that you set up components and stuff, that's sort of like the fundamentals of React, I would say.
Mm. Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, all of that makes sense. And also the like, I think that it was good to give a baseline knowledge of like what React also actually is comprised of. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like we went pretty thorough through it on this. And also, I know me personally, because I listen to these episodes again just to kind of jog my memory on things anyways. I'll probably re-listen to this one again just because it I don't know, I find it helpful to hear these things
Yeah,
more than once for some of it.
it's a
Sometimes you'll
lot.
yeah, well sometimes you'll notice like I'll like hear you like earlier with the use state thing. I was like, okay, can you short describe a little bit one more time,
Right.
and then it makes the rest of it make sense. And sometimes I just need things more than once, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
For the old brain box to work with the I wanted to say for the use effect thing, it was funny because while you were describing it, I was like thinking back to the idea that I had with getting reptile enclosure information from ChatGPT
Mhm.
by having ChatGPT describe us an enclosure for a ball python if you sent it a ball python, and
Mhm.
then taking the information and logging it and putting it into your database. And when you were describing the use effect thing, I was like, oh, so that's kind of what you would use for something like that anyways, so you could like uh grab information if this wasn't available
Mhm.
or something. Um, so that's I think why I picked that up, because I was like like immediately thinking of like ways I could use that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, no, yeah. As always, I appreciate you describing all of these things in great detail and then
Mhm.
re-describing them in slightly gentler detail, so I actually understand. I appreciate it a bunch, Seth. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, definitely when you write more React, which you're doing and you're working on and all of
mhm.
that kind of stuff, like after you've written it a bit, you could come back and listen to this episode and probably like it would click, a
Yeah,
lot easier, and like you would probably have more of like, oh, that's what that means, and like
yeah,
that kind of thing, like, oh, that's familiar, blah blah blah. So
yeah. Well, that's what's happened with every other episode. Like I listen to the old ones and like I'll like do my big swing and a miss like explanations or something, and I'm like,
mhm.
and I like shake my head. And I'm like, that wasn't right. Like, oh, silly Jake. but
Yeah,
that's cool. That means I'm figuring stuff out, and that's exciting.
yeah,
That's yeah, super exciting actually. Yeah, it's getting there.
cool, cool, cool.
Awesome.
Well, thanks to everyone for listening.
Yeah, thanks so much as always.
Yeah, and if you yeah, hopefully you're sticking with it and everything. If you're this far in, I don't know if you have listened to everything in sequential order like we have,
Hope.
like, yeah, like we hope. We kind of like stopped telling people to go back and listen to the first episode and whatever, but
Yeah.
if you just listen to this episode, don't, and go back and listen to the first one. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Well, also like if yeah, and also if you did just listen to this episode and you are following along with the program kind of a thing, do yourself a favor and go and listen to like episode like 1 through 4, and and like you'll listen to it and you'll be like, yeah, I know exactly everything that they're talking about. If
Mhm.
you've been following along and if you've been doing the work, then it's like, oh man, like whereas if you were just starting with us on the first episode and just starting to learn, then like it's pretty it's pretty rad. Just like the difference of listening to it for the first time and then like doing work and then listening to it and
Mhm.
going, wow, I did not know any of this stuff, and now like I know all of this stuff, and it's such a like base knowledge thing to know
Uh-huh.
any of this stuff now, which is it's just a really cool feeling.
Yeah.
I
So
know
every day go back and listen to
they're the same.
every episode
Yeah,
over
yeah.
again.
Because we know our voices are sultry and and
Yep.
just so nice to listen to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably not. No. But yeah, thanks so much for listening, everyone.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Keep at it. Fight the good fight. Keep going.
Yeah.
Especially when it's like monotonous and boring and it feels like you're not getting anywhere and not retaining things. Like, I was just talking to somebody the other day, where he was like, I'm like a mid-level developer, and like getting to like the senior level seems like such a huge undertaking, and like I don't I don't understand like how I'm going to get there. And I basically just told him kind of what I tell you every week is just like everything comes with repetition and like muscle
Mhm.
memory. So like even on the days where you feel like you're just doing the same thing that you've already done, you're like that in itself is just like honing your skill. If you're not
Yeah.
like improving it, like if you're not feeling like you're improving, if you're doing the same thing, you are improving it. Like basically just like the more you do something, the easier it's going to get for you, and the more natural it's going to come for you, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So just keep at it. That's the main thing. It's just like repetition and consistency. That's like the
Yeah.
key.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I definitely see that
yeah.
being a thing, especially on my weeks where I haven't been repeating and I've been lazy. It's a thing.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so yeah, I always appreciate the encouragement too, Seth.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Just keep swimming.
Yeah, just
All
keep
right.
on swimming.
Cool. Well, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Yep, we'll talk then. I actually might be in Vegas. I'm
Oh
gonna
yeah,
be in
yeah,
Vegas
that's
next
right.
week, so
Yeah.
we'll see. It might be a couple
We'll do a
weeks, but
special Vegas episode
yeah,
where he
special
brings his
Vegas episode.
yeah.
You're just gonna hear like bass and me like screaming about
Yeah.
something. I want $100. Nah. But
All right.
but yeah, we'll talk again soon. Everyone have a good one.
All right. See ya.
Yeah.